Chatting with Jesse Redmond from Water Tower Research. We're going to talk about LEEF Brands. So Jesse, thanks for doing this.
Welcome.
I saw you talked about LEEF Brands on Twitter. I read your report, and I decided to come to this Benzinga Cannabis Conference. And when I saw your name on the list, I was like, I need to talk to him. So let's do an interview and tell me about LEEF. Like, you talk about a lot of different companies. What's so interesting about LEEF?
Yeah, so I got familiar with LEEF, I guess, about a year or so ago. And being in Santa Barbara County, I ran a store in Santa Barbara. I live in Santa Barbara. And so I know the stories really well. And, Glass House Brands has been a story that's been really successful, really aspirational company that's gotten a lot of investor attention. And then I learned about LEEF Brands, and I made a visit out to their farm. I guess it was in August of last year was when we went out there, and I started to meet the team, went to the investor day, and started to connect the dots that LEEF Brands is a similar opportunity to Glass House Brands, whereas Glass House Brands is the dominant is the dominant producer of flower and kind of the middle market. LEEF Brands can do something similar by dominating the bulk extract market. And so that got me initially interested in this story, but it was really Salisbury Canyon Ranch and the opportunity there with this 187-acre plot that they have, the opportunity to shift margins and really improve the business by combining the 187 acres of cultivation with the facility in Willits and putting those pieces of the puzzle together. So I think LEEF is an interesting story the way it is today, but I think the way the story gets super interesting is the planting of Salisbury Canyon Ranch next year.
When I wrote my original report on LEEF, I did look at Glass House because I think it's a great comparable. At the beginning, Glass House didn't have great margins, and then they did something, the margins improved, profitability improved, and EBITDA, and then the stock, of course, or the company got rewarded for that. And when I looked at LEEF, I saw the same thing, that margins are not yet where they need to be, and now you're talking about the ranch, right? Because ranch is a important part to improving those margins. So why?
I would call it transformational, and I don't think that's sensationalistic. I think that's where the 1 + 1 = 3 comes together, and that you're not only the dominant producer of bulk extracts in terms of the production part, but you also can add the farming part, which is the Salisbury Canyon Ranch, and those two pieces come together, as you mentioned, by improving margins. But where it gets super interesting is the type of products that you can create. So for example, if you're looking to do distillate, you can run that from trim as one option, but you can also grow specialized strains that will get you the most yield on distillate. Now you can have a second section of the farm, that's your hydrocarbon extracts, and grow strains that are just designed for that. A third portion could be your live rosin. So I see the opportunity with Salisbury Canyon Ranch to do two things. One is to improve margins because you're taking that cultivation portion, but also to improve products because you can grow things that are specific to the extraction method. And then number two is you can grow things that are popular and people want. So let's say the candy gas terpene profile is so popular, they can go plant a bunch of great strains that are going to yield well, be perfect for that extraction technique, but also be on the cutting edge of what the California market wants. So Salisbury Canyon Ranch improves margins, but also improves products.
When I talked to Kevin, he talked about how right now they are buying the ingredients from 300 different farms. This is their network, but the consistency might not be there. But when they do their own, that changes, and that's kind of like what you're saying, right?
I would say it'd be consistency, but also what's desirable and what's hot. And that changes quickly. It can change even season to season. And they have a great partnership with Lifted, through Micah's experience in the market. Micah knows what the consumer wants. He's been on the cutting edge of California for probably coming up on 20 years now. And so I think it's about growing great material, but also growing the sexy material that people want, especially in the concentrate market. It's pretty trendy and it tends to fluctuate quite a bit. So if you can come out not just with things that are going to yield great for the margins, but also be the things that are in demand, I think it's those two pieces of the puzzle that are the opportunity.
As part of my learning journey to learn about LEEF, I had to learn about, just in general, the cannabis market, but I also studied about 20 different other cannabis companies. And it struck me a bit that why is nobody talking about LEEF? Like everybody else is talking about all the company in that ETF, but I don't see much said about LEEF.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think LEEF is what I would call an undercovered and under-recognized story. And I think it has gotten less traction and less initial investor awareness because California gets painted with one brush, right? It's easy to look at California or cannabis and say cannabis is really tough. California is also really tough. And so sometimes people just want to throw out the baby with the bathwater and say, stay away from California. And it's, we're being candid, the California market isn't growing as quickly as we would have hoped. It does have challenges in terms of local ordinances, getting more dispensaries open. But what's missing from that is that there's winners and losers in the California market. There's opportunities to take share, right? Which is exactly what Glasshouse has done, as others have had to fold because they couldn't stick around the greenhouse flower market anymore. They were well enough capitalized, they had low enough COGS, they could step in while others fell out and expand their market share. And LEEF can do exactly the same thing. The other thing about LEEF people don't realize is how many brands they are powering. So whether you're Jetty, whether you're Heavy Hitters, whether you're PAX, and so many others that are leaders in the California extract market, the product in those jars may come from LEEF brands. So I think because they've chosen to be the dominant bulk producer of concentrates, but not go the branding model, instead power other brands, sometimes people don't realize that it's LEEF behind the scenes that's in so many of these jars, that's in so many of these pens.
Going back to the glass house example, it's California. LEEF is in California. Glass house is on the flower side. LEEF is in extracts, right? What has Glass House done properly in terms of investor awareness that maybe LEEF can learn from?
Yes, I think Glasshouse has done a fantastic job telling the story, but also executing. And so they turn on new greenhouses, they set time frames, they execute, and they meet those. And so I think they've done a great job telling the story, being out there with cameras, showing the robot washing the greenhouse. And Graham's very charismatic. Kyle's great with the public as well. So I think they've done a great job on the investor education side, but also to give Glasshouse proper credit, they've also done a great job on the execution side, and they've continued to grow revenue in California while the market has been flat or contracting. So I think if I were to learn something from Glasshouse, it'd be two things. One is go out there and tell your story, tell people what you're going to do, document that story, but also you need to nail the execution part because there's no point in telling the story if you're not going to nail the execution. So with LEEF Brands planting Salisbury Canyon Ranch in 2025, it'll be fun for investors to follow along with your content, follow along with my content, see those plants in the ground, see that first harvest in the summer, see the second planting go in with the photo period plants, see that with the fall harvest, see 2 harvests next year, and start to see the farm scale. And so I think it takes two things. I think one, it takes education and consistently telling that story with Glasshouse, which Glasshouse is really great at, but you have to pair that with nailing the execution as well. And I think we need to give Glasshouse a lot of credit on that side too.
In terms of like the valuation that Glasshouse receives after, of course, executing and improving margins, I think they're trading at like 4 times revenues or something like this last time I checked. And now LEEF is trading at a fraction of revenues. It's not even 1 times revenues, or we're about that right now, getting close to it. But now, with getting their own co-play, with the improvement in margins and maybe increasing revenue, do you think they can get similar valuation?
I think it'd be disingenuous to give a definitive answer to that, but I think that gap can close. And I think that I can't comment on Glasshouse's valuation, but it seems like LEEF on a relative basis to a lot of cannabis companies is undervalued. And it's because it's an undercovered story and the farm is a transformational event. And you don't see a lot of those in cannabis, right? If you're someone else that's just a concentrate producer in California that's kind of chugging along, where is the opportunity for them? Well, they can steal a little market share here, they can refine things a little bit here, and LEEF has those same opportunities. But what's absolutely different is because they're plugging in this, what can be fully planted, the 187-acre ranch, and it's that I think will help bridge that valuation gap, and I think that's the thing that investors can be excited about. I also think investors can be excited about how the brand can expand nationally. That's part of the Glass House story, is doing really well in California, arguably dominating the middle market for flower in California, but they also want to expand nationwide, right? They want to see Glass House flower be in Florida, have it be in Michigan, have it be in Tennessee eventually. And if you have an ideal place to grow flower like Glass House does, so does LEEF Brands. Like Salisbury Canyon Ranch, it's a beautiful place to grow flower, has great consistent growing conditions. Everyone wants California cannabis, and everyone will want California cannabis, but they'll also want extracts made in California from California flower. And so I think that with the valuation gap, I think it's going to close that. I think the recipe for it is executing on the farm. I think the extraction business, they're already nailing, but also think about the ability to plant some flags nationally. So going to East Coast markets, going to Southern markets, and expanding, helping people with their extracts business in those states to lay the groundwork so that in the future you have flags planted in those markets, and when interstate commerce exists, you can participate in that as well. So I think there's a few steps along the way to closing that valuation gap, and I think it'd be disingenuous to say exactly when and how that's going to happen, but I would not be surprised to see the LEEF multiple expand as we start to see some of these key milestones being hit, key milestones being planting the farm, key milestones meaning expanding nationally into some new markets, and also some exciting things on the extraction technology side that we'll hopefully be talking more about later this year.
Okay, so when you're saying the farm is so transformational, what's the big deal? Why can't others do it too?
I think you could get a farm, but it's very different to do what Glass House has done and have 6 million square feet in a glass house in Camarillo, California, in ideal growing conditions. It's not just a farm. It is ideally suited for what they want to do. For LEEF Brands, they actually don't need something as expensive as a glass house type facility because they're growing for extracts, not finished flower. And so they can do even potentially lower cost production because it is outdoor cultivation, may do some hoop houses eventually too, but generally focusing on sun-grown outdoor cultivation, which doesn't necessarily work fantastic for the finished flower market because a lot of consumers don't want outdoor flower. That's a long conversation. I think there's great outdoor flower out there as well, but typically what goes in jars in California is greenhouse flower or is indoor flower. What's perfect for the extract market is outdoor flower. And so that's exactly what they're set up to grow at Salisbury Canyon Ranch. And there are big barriers to entry. They have the largest land use permit in Santa Barbara County. Kevin, Micah can explain how difficult that permitting process is, how difficult it is to find a place where that's ideally suited for your growing conditions. And so it's not just a farm, it is an absolutely massive farm that just on a square footage basis can be 40% larger than Glass House Brands when they're both fully built out. In fairness to Glass House, because they have the light depth capabilities, they can get more harvest, so the output could still be more from Glass House because they're getting more turns of flower, more harvest per year in the Glass House conditions. But in terms of absolute scale, it's really unparalleled what LEEF is doing in California in terms of an ideal sun-grown farm, low-cost cultivation to feed the extracts business. If you were looking to grow finished flower, you probably wouldn't do what LEEF is doing, but because they're looking to farm for extracts, sun-grown cultivation at scale is absolutely what you need, and they have an unparalleled opportunity there.
I'm glad you used the term barriers of entry, and I'm sure you've heard Warren Buffett's moat, right, in investing. So that's one of the moats. Mm-hmm. Are there any other moats in the cannabis industry or for LEEF?
Can you expand on that?
So moat is kind of like a moat around the castle.
Yep.
Right, where a brand name can be a moat, or a cost advantage can be a moat. So for California cannabis companies, when the interstate is allowed, then California companies have a moat, mm-hmm. right? Because everybody wants California cannabis. But the fact that they have, the land, and it has barriers of entry for somebody else to copy, that gives them a moat from that regulatory standpoint, but also gives them a moat from the cost standpoint, mm-hmm. right?
Yeah, so I'd say the farm is one important piece, but another one is their extraction facility in Willits, which is 5,000 square feet, state of the art with 3 different lines. One being ethanol, which is used for distillate, which is common in pens and edibles and lower cost concentrates. 2 is the hydrocarbon extraction, like the live resin, which is super popular, comes in jars. Also, the cartridges are really popular. And then 3 is doing the great solventless, the live rosin. And so I'd say we're talking a lot about the farm today, which is the exciting transformational event in 2025. But they've also spent, over a decade becoming experts at extraction. We toured the facility, we documented, what we saw there in our report. And it's not just the fact that they have the fanciest machines, the latest and greatest technology, but it's the people behind it. They have experts in extraction that are the best that I've met in the business. And so I think that the moat exists in a couple areas. I think the moat exists in terms of the cultivation side, but I think the moat also exists in terms of that state-of-the-art extraction facility, the equipment that's there, but also the people that are driving it is another edge that they have.
Okay, so the final thoughts that I have, you talked about expanding to other states. And the first thing that comes to my mind is, well, you can't move your product from one state to another. So can you explain this expansion?
Sure. So you may find somebody who is operating, let's just make up a market in New Jersey, which is a really healthy, high margin market, at least twice the price of California for flower and concentrates. You may find somebody in New Jersey who has a cultivation edge and they're great at cultivation and they're starting to, build out cultivation in New Jersey, provide flower for that market. They also may want to pair that with an extracts business and use some of their trim and other material to produce extracts and produce a complementary and diversifying revenue source. Well, it's really hard to figure that out from scratch. So why not partner with someone like LEEF Brands, who's done that so successfully in California, has so much experience in terms of setting up the SOPs, knowing the best equipment, knowing the best strains to run, knowing what the market wants, and bring that California knowledge, that California technology, the California strains, and move those to other states where you could help people that are experts in their area and bolt on LEEF's expertise in the concentrate business. So that's, I think, one way you could see it happening. And it's not just New York, New Jersey, and those markets. It's really all across the U.S. Today we're in Chicago. A half-gram distillate pen here is about $40. That's about 4x the cost that it is in California. And so there's an opportunity to use the standard operating procedures, the technology, the IP that they develop competing in the toughest market in the country, which is California, and bring those to other higher margin markets like your Illinois, like your New Jerseys, and your New Yorks, and go to somebody and say, hey, I see you're doing really great on the cultivation side. Do you really want to start at square one in extraction, or do you want to start with a partner that's already learned how to do this in the toughest market in California and bring that expertise and knowledge here?
That's great. Thank you very much. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with my listeners about the company?
Yeah, I think my final thought would be that this is going to be one of the most exciting stories in 2025. I encourage everyone to learn about Salisbury Canyon Ranch, read our research about the extraction facility, follow both of our content as the farm gets planted, and see how they execute in 2025. Because it's one thing, there's 2 parts to this. One is you need to have the aspirational story, and 2 is you need to execute on that story. And I think today we've done a good job in terms of setting the table about what that opportunity is, and now it's time to watch the execution, which we can see next year.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.